Boy, that's a hyperbolic title and thumbnail, huh? Well, let's start by answering that definitively. DS2 and Lords of the Fallen are two completely different beasts. They are swinging at entirely different targets, and their successes and failings aren't really all that comparable. That being said, yeah, I'd definitely be much more interested in playing DS2 again over Lords of the Fallen. But that doesn't necessarily mean that this game is completely without merit. And I'll admit that I'm even a little excited for what's coming with the third game in the series, Lords of the Fallen 2. Which I'm sure is the main reason this game was included with the PS Plus subscription, and therefore the only reason this video is getting made. So yeah, hopefully that means some of y'all will also be a little excited and their marketing strategy actually worked after this. Yeah, sorry if this isn't the complete dunk on whichever game you wanted me to shit all over, but according to my demographic analytics, we're mostly adults here. So let's check out this worthless piece of shit game with a cool, level head. Oh. Wait. Howdy, I'm Prakuza, and welcome to DevBox, where today I had to force myself to turn my first playthrough of Lords of the Fallen into content if I wanted to actually take the time to get through it. So, I guess this is, can you have fun playing Lords of the Fallen? Yeah, sometimes. During the bosses especially. Other folks probably liked it better though. So power to ya if that's you. So, we start by picking our character, and if my recent attempts to get cast in the upcoming Bloodborne movie are any indication, that shit is my absolute jam. Naturally, this means we've gotta pick the Black Feather Ranger as our starting class, because not only is it the Bloodborne pointy hat, but it's also the Eileen Crow garb, one of my favorite drips in that game. So, like, yeah, not a choice. This had to be done. Once we're all pretty and dripping like proper pros, we can start our endless march forward through the dank, dark dregs of the tutorial and its educational introduction through this obsidian black world, following Karen down a sanguine river of pain. I gotta say, this tutorial really does a great job of getting the player ready for how the game is going to play out, and while I wish the tutorial pop-ups were either easier to get rid of in real time or would disappear sooner, it's a decent way of getting the information it needs across without being too obstructive. At least it doesn't lock you in place so that you have to read it. We learn how to fight, how to parry and riposte, although boo to no backstabs, and most importantly, we get a crash course in how the Umbral Realm works. This is probably the best part of the game, actually. I've heard some mixed feelings about the Umbral stuff, but I honestly think that the Umbral Realm and the lamp are one of the most successful parts of Lords of the Fallen. Aside from overusing some enemy types and traps, the Umbral Realm is a fantastic addition to the Souls-like genre. A great use of the double world system from Medium by Bloober Team that came out a few years before this. Very likely that both concepts were developed independent of each other and the similarities are happenstance, but still, that's the only other comparison that comes to mind at the moment. Finally, we get to the tutorial boss. It's a decent introduction to how bosses are going to fight throughout the game, and easy enough to hopefully not filter too many folks out. Might be a bit too simple though, as it gives a somewhat limited scope of what to expect from bosses. But there's really no such thing as the perfect tutorial for a Souls-like anyway, so we'll take it. As we continue on, however, we head through a bit of a forest and a small village, and eventually we get to the first castle area of the game, Skybridge. As for the locations themselves, they're fine. Lots of does not open from this side doors and backtracking that reveals new items and whatnot, really good stuff there. Honestly, these are some solid opening areas that aren't overly complicated and kinda hard to get lost in. That won't be the case pretty soon. Then we get to the first real boss, Pieta, she of blessed renewal. Damn, those are some intense eyes in the cutscene. As the tooltip that refuses to go away for my entire first attempt states, she is a great boss to practice parrying on. Her attacks are fairly well telegraphed. Most can be parried for heavy poise damage. Her poise is low enough to allow getting a riposte with only a few parries, and we haven't gotten to the bloated health bars yet, where a single riposte is basically a tickle rather than a momentum-turning event. That being said, Pieta kicks my ass for a bit while I learn her tuning and the timing of those parries. I'm not sure exactly how thin the margin for error is here, but it feels about as tight as Lies of P, which has even less forgiving parry timing than Sekiro. Granted, I love Lies of P and hate Sekiro, so I'm actually kind of fine with how this game is taking the approach towards parries. kinda with that deflect type maneuver. Altogether, I probably would have gotten through Pieta a lot faster if I'd decided to summon for the fight, but I'll be trying to do that sparingly. Although, at a certain point, my patience does run out at some of the more frustrating fights, namely some of the multi-phase ones with 2 health bars to take down. So don't expect me to hold to this solo-only vibe all the way to the end. I'll admit at this point, I'm actually really enjoying my time with Lords of the Fallen. Even as I get lost and the Umbral Butterflies do dick all to actually help me figure out where to go, combat encounters are mostly fine, and the mini-bosses showing up periodically make for pretty interesting one-off fights. Sure would be a shame if the later game was nothing but a handful of these dudes scattered around with little thought. You know, because we wouldn't want interesting encounters like this one against Scourge's sister Delith in her sexy blasphemous cosplay to get diluted through overuse. Not everything is perfect, like I'm not the biggest fan of the Ardent Penitent and his wonky movesets once we get to the outer scaffolding of the castle, but running into a handful of abrasive enemies is par for the course in the genre, so they're annoying, but they're not really a critique, simply an observation. Without them, the game would feel almost lacking in difficulty. At this point, we also eventually get the strength requirement to start using the Moon's Judgment. This is a weapon that was added as a part of the 2nd anniversary update, which I'm only getting to use because I'm playing this game so late. In fact, let me know in the comments if some of the leniency I'm giving the game now is a result of me playing this 2.0 version, which has revamped it a lot since launch. I don't really know what the differences from day one are, and I'm really curious to see if every change has been only an improvement or if there's some that are a bit more controversial among fans. Anyway, we test out our new weapon on another cool mini-boss that I really hope doesn't show up in droves moving forward, as we take out Gentle Gavarus, Mistress of Hounds. Easily the toughest fight since Pieta, and she kills me a handful of times. However, returning with an upgraded Moon's Judgment and some extra strength absolutely chews through her once I can get the parry timing down. Then we get the second main boss, the Congregator of Flesh. This is not quite as good as Pieta, I'll be honest. That being said, Pieta is going to be the metric by which we compare every other boss in the game. She is an incredible starting fight, and so not living up to her is really less throwing bosses in Bed of Chaos territory and more settling them below the average. As for the Congregator though, yeah, this dude starts a lot of problems I have with some of the bosses moving forward, especially the larger monster type bosses. Namely, it's his size and unwieldy hitboxes that can make him kind of a pain. Figuring out parry timings is impossible, because it can be difficult to tell if we need to guard when his feet come stomping down, or his hand, or both in rapid succession, or if these attacks are better dodged than guarded in the first place, or if the overhead strikes are getting around my guard entirely for one reason or another and hitting me from the back. It's kind of a mess, and honestly, it's more greed and luck that gets me through this fight than anything else. This could be little more than a skill issue as I try to get my bearings on the differences between this Lords of the Fallen, the original Lords of the Fallen, and the Souls games that takes so many notes from. It's at this point, yes, this early into the game, that I start to spiral downward. But the Forsaken Fen is really a tough nut to crack. At this point in my playthrough, I'd been thinking of other Souls-likes that came out around the same time, and while I've already commented that some of the combat is similar to Lies of P, the level design of the Fen really screams Mortal Shell, and that is absolutely not a compliment. Like, I'm sure there will be folks who enjoyed Mortal Shell back in 2020, but that's the only Souls-like that I've started but never finished. I mean, I've slogged through some shit, or even popular games that didn't vibe with me, but that was the first time I went up against a handful of bosses and simply quit, because the gameplay was so rough. The worst offense of Mortal Shell, however, has to be its level design, with the most convoluted forest as the central map leading out to 3 other connected areas. It twists and turns on itself without having much of the same intrigue of the classic, oh, we're back here design quality of the Soul series. This is exactly how I felt muscling through Forsaken Fen. It felt like it wanted to be the Forbidden Woods from Bloodborne, but instead it comes off as Lords of the Fallen's Falgrim. Even the bosses in this area aren't really a highlight, as Mendacious Visage's gimmick really falls short to the boss's spammy attacks that can jump at the player from across the arena. These guys also show up a handful of times as the game progresses, and I still don't know what exactly makes them open their face in the first place. Then there's the Hushed Saint. Gyobu Masataka Oniwa, this guy isn't. And I don't even like Gyobu Masataka Oniwa. So yeah, I was already pretty done with how lost I got in the fen, didn't enjoy fighting most of the enemies here, and the bosses were kind of a slog, even if I take out the Hushed Saint in one try. This critique definitely comes more down to the fact that I don't really like needing to wait for my turn to fight in these games. I always prefer bosses that allow me to be greedy, but then punish that greed, rather than turning off the boss's health bar and making me survive some elaborate attack until the boss is ready to get punched in the face again. Still, we get through, kind of by the skin of our teeth if I'm being completely honest, and can cleanse the first beacon. Consider these your 4 Lord Souls, or Primal Bonfires. They're the MacGuffins we need to track down and activate in order to get into the final level of the game and fight the final boss. This marks the first of 5, and the game is already starting to drag on me. Surely, it won't get worse from here. Also at this point, I finally have enough materials and souls to trade out our weapon again. This time we're moving from the Moon's Judgment to Pieta's Sword. That's right, we've got a motherfucking lightsaber. And we're in Fitzroy's Gorge. This place has some of the best enemies in the game too. I really love parrying these axe guys. When you get it right, the rhythm is so clean against them. Unfortunately, this is also when I start trying to dual wield 2 short swords, and that doesn't exactly go well. It kind of looks like dual wielding is meant more for daggers and fist weapons, so that might be why it's underwhelming with 2 short swords, but yeah. I'll wind up spending a lot of materials and souls trying to get dual wielding online in a real way moving forward, but two-handing or using a shield with the lightsaber proves to be way better every time. The Gorge also introduces a new type of enemy, Ravenous Fascinators, also known as Lords of the Fallen's own version of the Mimic. These can be denoted by the rapid motion of the item pickup that they pretend to be, though it'll take me a while before I realize this, so we'll be getting chomped on a lot from here on out. They can also apparently be hit by Soul Flay in order to send them away and get an actual item drop from them, but considering I still haven't figured out how to use this on normal enemies until much later, I certainly won't be doing it on them for the entire playthrough. Also, this was really interesting the first time I ran into them, but boy, do they love to shove them all fucking over the place. It was interesting exactly once. After that first time though, the tell is a bit too subtle and the counter isn't exactly intuitive, so I could do with at least a few less of these throughout the game. Then, to finish this area off, I run into Ruiner, who has a great name since he absolutely ruined whatever fun I was having at this point. His specific penchant for leaving flames on the ground makes fighting him with wither damage really frustrating, to the point of being damn near impossible once you're in the Umbral realm. Then I ran into Light Reaper, who kind of acts like the Pursuer and will attack us in several places moving forward. Only this guy is way harder than the Pursuer. I couldn't imagine killing this dude with a ladle. We'll get to him again later. Love the design, I'll say that much. Don't have much positive to say for the fight though, considering that he also does that wait for your turn stuff when the 2-headed dragon flies over. At this point, we also get a key that can lead us down a separate path, but we'll be holding off on that for now, since behind that new path is a ridiculous boss who gets the giant stonehead dude as backup once we're in the Umbral realm. Even when I do beat this guy eventually, it's not exactly the most fun fight, as the follow-up blasts on the swings deal insane damage and are totally impossible to parry. Let's end our lightsaber celebration chapter though with a revisit of the ceaseless discharge. Why? Who looked at the boss that stands off a giant ledge and thought, yeah, we want to do that, we want that in our game, but make it worse? Sorry for anyone who loves the spurned progeny, but this bastard prince is exactly that, a bastard, and I hated fighting it. Not only because the pace of attacks is perfectly set to infinitely catch the player trying to heal, or even because the speed of attacks and recoil means we only get a couple of hits in at a time. No, those are frustrating enough. But what really grinds me here is this stupid Aura Blast attack that we need to hide behind some rampart pieces to survive. The whole fight already feels like a time tax that doesn't respect my willingness or desire to get to the actual fun shit. But this fight really overdoes it on this point in the second phase. An extremely underwhelming fight to cap off this leg of the journey with. But don't worry, we're not even like halfway through the whole experience. I haven't even watched that movie, but having the "yearned for the mines" line in the chapter title is supposed to be good SEO, so it's there. Either way, this is a great time to bring up two aspects of this game's design, and shoehorn in some development info on this game and its stupid title. First up, this was the first time I ran into an issue that I'd gotten warned about from the very first time I'd entered the Umbral Realm. Spending too much time in here will eventually cause dread to build up, which then summons a Bringer of Stillness. We've seen these guys around and will soon fight a trio boss against a few of them at one point. There have also been a few scattered around that have offered some of the most authentic jump scares I've ever seen in a game. This one, however, is known as the Scarlet Shadow, and while it is certainly beatable, the fact that it comes after being stuck in the Umbral Realm for a long time, chances are your resources aren't exactly at their best. That's what happened to me the one time this guy actually appeared here in the mines. And this was honestly a really interesting encounter. Kinda wish I had the time to sit around and let it happen again, but at this point, I was already looking forward to getting through the end of the game, and we are still a long way from there. The second bit of game design I want to point out is why the Scarlet Shadow was chasing me in the first place. I got completely lost while in this mine area, to the point that I was blindly searching through the Umbral Realm until my dread maxed out. Now, normally, I can always ask the butterflies in my Umbral lamp to guide me along towards the next objective. The only problem is that this mechanic isn't exactly foolproof, and I am plenty the fool, and was for about an hour. Because no matter how many times it told me that I needed to cross the gap in the flooded area of the mine, I never noticed that there was a lever to pull that drained the water and opens the path forward. Most of this is definitely on me for walking past that lever like 100 times without noticing what it was, but it was certainly not helped by the fact that the butterflies never once guided me to that lever, no matter how close I got to it. This isn't the first time I've complained about level design, and it certainly won't be the last. Though I won't be getting lost nearly as often from here on out, as the later areas are slightly better designed, but between the fen and the mines, I really can't stress enough how uninspired some of these level layouts are. What is inspired, though, is the art design, which is best seen in some of the upcoming boss fights, like against Harrower Dervla, the Pledged Knight. We've been beating on a lot of women throughout this playthrough, huh? I'm sure there's lore significance, but I really haven't been paying attention to the lore. Anyway, this boss is your classic Lotharic, Lorien, or Radon Mikula fight, with the big boy being the main fight in Phase 1, but somehow getting a massive power boost after the little one starts piggybacking in Phase 2. With the red hair, Dervla even has a touch of Millennia in there, and some Gale with that offhand crossbow. Still, I absolutely love the visuals of this fight across both phases. Dervla's armor is probably my favorite outfit in the entire game, maybe either tied or slightly edging out Pieta from way back in that first boss fight. Speaking of Pieta, I summoned her for this fight since I had little faith in getting through the second phase in a timely manner. Not sure how necessary she was, but it was cool to have the backup, I won't lie. Overall, the art direction from Hexworks is phenomenal. After diving into the development hell this game progressed through in order to get to this point, it's amazing that the team was able to put together such a beautiful looking world, and make designs that are as stellar as Dervla. For a little backstory on the development cycle, by the way, Deck 13 is often given the lion's share of the blame for how the original Lords of the Fallen turned out, as the studio, which would eventually move on to make some of my favorite Souls-likes, the Surge series, is credited as the developer, while CI Games is credited as the publisher. However, according to posts from the original dev team, such as CI's Tomek Kagop, the major design work, including art direction, story, and lore writing, and even the basic design of the gameplay and combat, were put together by CI, with Deck 13 implementing and realizing those ideas, to the point that the developers consider it more of a co-development between the two companies, rather than a singular effort where only one team took on the lion's share of the development work, and the other only supplied money for marketing and getting onto consoles and PCs, as the terms developer and publisher might imply. Funny enough, we've actually seen this type of co-development with the PS1 remakes of the Lunar series way back in that Retro Respect we covered for those games, as Studio Alex worked with Vanguard Gameworks in a similar fashion, with the former developing and the latter then implementing those design elements respectively. Anyway, with Hexworks now running the show for this Lords of the Fallen reboot and the sequel coming later this year, the project is pretty much entirely in the hands of CI, considering that Hexworks is a subsidiary developer under CI's corporate umbrella, founded in 2020 specifically to finally get this project out the door, since it had been fumbling around between development teams since way back in 2014. This all feels like a random tangent, but it's still something to keep in mind as I continue to critique the game. Even though the development cycle was technically 9 years of stop-and-go production, it only wound up in the hands of Hexworks that would get it over the hump in the last 3 years. Kind of an accelerated time for a game of this length and graphical fidelity. Totally makes sense why some stuff doesn't exactly please in all the best ways. Speaking of stuff that doesn't please, we've got Kinringer Guardian Fullard. Not gonna lie, this is one of the worst bosses I've faced so far. Possibly the worst boss, in fact. Like, he's not the hardest or the most complex, but I really hate this stupid Ice Blast attack he does sometimes while throwing the fire. So yeah, I think Fullard is actually my least favorite boss in the game. Kind of some crazy whiplash considering how good Dervla was. Although I think Pieta is still the best so far. Anyway, Fullard is guarding the next worst area in the game. The Fief of the Chill Curse. I do not like this place, and its many Fullard clones, or the ice variants of the Mistress of Hounds. And worse of all is the dogs. The dogs. Are they really wolves and not dogs? Who fucking cares? All I know is that I hate them, and this level is one big linear hallway that makes too much use of the vestige seedlings over using shortcuts to lead back and forth to the main vestige of the area. That's not to say that the shortcuts are missing entirely, but the long stretches expect players to use seedlings often as a portable checkpoint. However, I was using them frequently early on, ran out at a critical point back in the fen, and swore off using them again for a long time. This is when I really started to make more use of the seedlings again, but it's only after learning the hard lesson that this is meant to be suffered through slowly, taking every seedling checkpoint as they come in order to avoid the 5-minute backtracks if you die midway through the level. The point is, this place is frustrating, and continues to show Hexworks' lack of confidence with looping levels back on top of each other in compelling ways to keep checkpoint progress feeling more organic and convenient, like many Souls-like contemporaries manage to do. Finally, we get to a boss fight that could be a highlight of the game, but falls short for me because I still am not a huge fan of the survival phases where I have to dodge attacks and wait for the opportunity to attack again when the game decides it's ready to give it to me. Visually though, the Fallen Crow is an incredible design, with the broken beak under the human skull. Also, mechanically, I do like the idea of having to dodge the crow's attacks while focusing mostly on the little girl's spirit for my way of doing damage. Very Genie Jafar's lamp from Kingdom Hearts 1, the OG Souls-like, although the addition of adds that slowly get more and more fierce as the fight goes on, and the removal of the random sliding blocks is a massive improvement. What isn't improved here is the number of survival phases there are, and the stupid hurricane that kicks them off. I'm honestly not sure if the center is the safe spot, or if I'm supposed to roll out of it or whatever, but whatever the plan is, I don't like it, and I wish the boss didn't drag out the fight with these time sinks that I feel forced to tank through the entire time. And with that, we can cleanse the second beacon. The next 3 will be kinda rapid fire, so we'll cover them quickly. Oh, and I also get attacked by Light Reaper again, but he only attacks once for some reason. Still not sure what this guy's deal is, but pursuer gonna pursue, I guess. Alright, so we've got 3 more beacons to place, a few more castles to traverse though, but overall at this point, I'm mostly lost and ready for this game to be finished. It's overstayed its welcome, and in an effort not to do the same myself, we're blasting through the next few bosses, including the Poopy Man. Now, at this point, we've also started to run into a bunch of enemies that first appeared as mini-bosses and are now flooding the environments, the very first tutorial boss included. It's honestly making this later section of the game kind of a slog, as we now have to go up against pretty tanky enemies that are tuned to boss fights and not bog-standard cannon fodder. The point is, we've officially stopped having fun, and I'm now going through the motions. Except against the real boss fights, like Tancred, Master of Castigations. This shit is incredibly fun. It's the path to these bosses that is insufferable. Anyway, Tancred's first phase is a bit tough, as some of the magic that empowers his attacks can make nailing parries somewhat difficult. Still, it's a pretty good dude in armor with spear fight, which we've actually done a lot of at this point, like the Poopy Man before. The second phase, though, is both very interesting because he attacks more like a beast with wilder patterns, but it's also a bit easier. Like, I'm sure if I was still trying to parry all of his attacks, this would be a nightmare. But going for dodge strats only, Reinhold the Immured in the second phase is pretty easy. He's no Ludwig, that's for sure. With the brothers sharing a body dead, we can light the next beacon and be on our way. There's a quick speed bump with Abbess Ursula, who is really an introduction to a new enemy type because, again, every mini-boss is going to become a normal enemy moving forward. This, by the way, is when I started to notice how powerful Soulflay could be, especially against stronger enemies that I need to stun for a second. Yep, we're basically 2 bosses from the endgame, and I've only now noticed that a major tool in my belt is useful on powerful enemies, even mini-bosses, like Rapturous Huntress Liren. Not much to say about this boss though. She's a bit too tanky as she turtles behind that shield, but I've got a new shield of my own to turtle behind because of a new item I got from the blacksmith that lets me use the shield I don't have the stats for, and it doesn't even weigh me down anymore when I use it. Kind of a busted item and a wonderful reward for killing an ancient creature that has spent untold years trapped as a slave. But yeah, totally breaks this build at this point. And that new shield helps with pretty much every remaining fight. Like against the Judge Cleric, a major lore character we've been hearing about up until now, who is, I'm sure, very important and cool. And I really was sleeping through all of the lore stuff. It doesn't help that I'm not a fan of the way the game gives out narrative beats with those memory echoes. Kind of stops the momentum of the gameplay dead to have to sit and listen to a whole bunch of these. Anyway, the Judge Cleric is a pretty good fight. Once again, we've got powerful enemy in armor with either a sword or a spear. But the twist on this one is that she has both. Ooh. Anyway, second try, the tank build go burr, apparently. Not only does the shield feel better at blocking, like it feels like the parry window is wider, but I didn't test to find out for sure, but defending with a high stability shield also makes any non-AoE or pool of damage on the ground type attack kinda meaningless. The plus 10 lightsaber is certainly part of that as well, as is the effect of an eye I have socketed that gives me 8 free damageless seconds when I enter the Umbral Realm for the first time, meaning that dying gives me ages to wail on the boss for free with no risk of being killed in the meantime. It's no The Surge 2's infinite health build, but it does the job to get me through some of these fights, and light the next beacon. Our final obstacle before the finale is the Light Reaper, who I summoned Pieta for. He's a real pain of a boss, but at this point, I really shouldn't be trying to engage with the parry system anymore. I'm not good at it, and the ripostes have stopped being all that powerful. So it makes this fight a slog, since he has some of the toughest parry timing out of any boss, especially given that he can attack with 4 arms, and the second set on either side tends to hit in a rhythm that either doesn't allow for both to be parried, or I might be getting old and simply can't get those parries anymore, I don't know. The shield does well though, and Pieta does work, as long as she doesn't stand in the fire that the Light Reaper's pet 2-headed dragon leaves on the ground. Pieta, move! Move! Stop standing in the flames! Once we get past this final pest, we can light the 5th beacon. Please enjoy the same footage of the last beacon, as the actual beacon lighting footage for this section is missing. I probably forgot to hit record, to be honest. I want out of this game already. Please let me leave. We're skipping a decent amount of the content here to get right to the final boss fights. First up is the Sundred Monarch. Again, might hit a bit harder to know that I'm fighting the king of this world if I paid attention to the lore and narrative at all. It's not a critique every time I bring it up, by the way. It's more of a clarifying element. I chose not to engage with the lore, and therefore I cannot comment on it. The only reason I bring it up is because I know lots of people do care about the Souls-like lore, but like, I grew up on Square Enix games on PS1 and 2. I need my story spoon-fed to me. Lore's great, but it can't beat a real narrative, and without a real narrative arc to follow, I struggle to get engaged. As for the actual boss, this guy is a weird little goober now, isn't he? One of those flaily bosses that uses their mass to slap around the arena and leaves trails of hits with awkward hitboxes that make parrying a bit of a chore. That being said, blocking the majority of his attacks and getting 8 seconds of super slaughter mode towards the end of the fight means that this dude goes down in one go. Yeah, this build may be completely busted against boss fights. Well, time for the final boss fight, I guess. That's right, we're fighting a deer himself, or at least his eidolon. Who's a deer, you ask? I still don't know, but he'll fucking tell you throughout the fight if you're curious. This dude does not stop yapping, even when you've already sat through his dialogue once and come back for the fight again. He keeps on going. That is to say, I died on my first attempt. The second went much better. As for the fight itself, this is actually a pretty solid fight. This time, dude in armor with spear doesn't get a shield, so strafing becomes the best way to avoid his attacks, and you can always punish regardless of which side you wind up on. At this point, I've also pretty much given up on the idea of ever going for parries on this guy. If I need to defend, my new shield does great. Got this one from the Remembrance of the Sundered Monarch. A truly silly item to bring into a fight as a shield, the bottom half of the statue that the boss was chained to, but hey, it works, and honestly, I love how goofy it is. I love this shit. Put more of these in games. Give me a whole damn statue as a shield, and I will be happy. Anyway, on a second attempt, we get the fight done, and can finally roll credits. As for my final thoughts on the game, I'm a bit torn about it. Honestly, the DS2 comparisons that I led with is surprisingly apt. Both suffer from similar struggles, mostly in how they interpret the idea of creating a difficult experience for the player. Where DS2 implements mechanics meant to get players trapped and stuck at certain choke points, and removes the ability to iframe out of tricky situations, Lords of the Fallen takes more of the throw a bunch of enemies into a hallway and make half of them basically mini-bosses approach. Both are flawed, in my opinion, though broken defensive builds that lean on survivability can mitigate that flaw a bit in both cases. Lords of the Fallen also really loves its traps and its tricks, your usual suspects with the mimics and the enemies and items placed near ledges, only for a hidden enemy to jump out and push the player over that ledge themselves. It's very trolly rage game shit that works in something like The Trees Hate You, but when getting back to that lol 6 troll moment is a 5-minute grind through 4 mini-bosses uphill in the snow both ways, I could honestly go for a lot less trolling and a lot more yellow paint. That being said, I think DS2 and Lords of the Fallen excel in the same place as well. The visual design, while limited to only a few muted color palettes, is fantastic when it's allowed to shine, especially in the designs of bosses and the vistas out in the distance. It's only a shame that so much of the game is spent inside of plenty of dank, brown, gray caves. Equally though, the boss fights are pretty solid. There's a handful of stinkers, and some boss enemies probably shouldn't have been thrown around so willy-nilly in later areas as regular dudes, but between Pieta, Dervla, and hell, a deer right at the end here, these are some top-tier boss fights. No joke, if you're into Elden Ring or DS3 style boss fights, this game is a treasure trove of them. There's a few stinkers, but like DS1 has Bed of Chaos, so a handful of stinkers is par for the course. As for the game itself, I think Lords of the Fallen's biggest issue comes from the fact that it launched at the exact wrong time for something this janky and bloated to possibly succeed among the contemporaries at the time. Elden Ring had come out a year earlier, and Souls-like fans mostly loved it. There's still a small stint of us Elden Ring haters out there, but it otherwise received a mostly positive reception. Lies of P released a month before Lords in 2023, proving that a company with basically no background in the genre can go toe-to-toe with FromSoft and make an incredible game. So Lords of the Fallen releasing an okay, passable, downright fun at times, but not all the time, title among an era of absolute bangers, totally kills the momentum this game might have been able to muster if it had released in, say, August instead of October. That all being said, I'm pretty excited to see what Hexworks has in store for Lords of the Fallen 2, which, yeah, still a dumb name, but I'm genuinely looking forward to it now. I don't need it to be bigger and better, in fact, shrink the scope, but expand on those stellar boss fights and that impeccable art design, and Lords 2 could potentially be a masterpiece, as long as Hexworks has taken the right lessons from the response to the initial game, or spiritual sequel success. What's with the fucking names, guys? This is Lords of the Fallen 2. The one coming this year, it's 3. It's the third game. What? Hey, it's that time again. The end of the video where I invite folks to come check out the Patreon. The link is in the description, and we're going to make good on the rewards for those currently pledged. Patreon members get early access to new content and their names written in the credits at the end of videos. And those who pledge in the top tiers get their names read out, like our DevBox designers, Genghis Braun, and our DevBox developers, Azul. Thanks for your support, and thanks for watching. Oh, but yeah, I guess I should answer that question at the top. Yeah, this is better than DS2, but that's only because DS2 is total dog shit.